Hey, what's up everybody? Gannon here, back at it again with another one of my Star Trek reviews. Last week's episode was really bold and pretty sensational as it introduced us to a new character in the form of Angel. Really gave us a great foundation for the relationship that Nurse Chapel and Spock are set to develop by the time of the TOS, where she is delivering him some Plomeek soup. Also, we're reintroduced to Sybok, which is really exciting. Spock's mind-controlling half-brother from the Final Frontier movie. It did a pretty damn good job at exploring modern topics of gender and sexuality with only a couple weak points throughout the episode. I was really satisfied with last week's episode. Comically though, you have the clearly prejudiced members of the Star Trek community who will swear that it's either the worst episode of the season or like one of the worst Star Trek episodes that they have ever seen. Both are intellectually dishonest from a mile away. While the scenes with the away team aboard the Serene Squall weren't the strongest, to make either of the claims, in my opinion, just really shows your true colors as a viewer and makes you look like a complete clown. To call last week's episode the worst episode of the season is silly and tells me you're either lying or you haven't watched episode 3 or, unfortunately, today's episode. With all that being said, if you can't tell already, I got some things to say about this week's episode. Season 1, episode 8, titled The Elysian Kingdom. Let's get right into it. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I was just over here kind of drifting out of consciousness. A little bit resident sleeper. Was the first third of that episode as boring as I thought it was? Yeah, I have to sit here and say that this episode probably, in my opinion, was the weakest of the season so far. It is no secret that I have never been a huge fan of this Dr. BENGA transporter-daughter plotline. I felt from the very beginning that it was just kind of like a plot hole, kind of making it Dr. BENGA's main core thing that makes him a character. Come full circle in today's episode, and I have just got to sit here and say that this is the weakest plot line of Star Trek Strange New Worlds so far. Quick summary of what happens in today's episode, because I'm not going to spend as much time on the summary as I usually do in most reviews, mostly because this episode is quite simple on surface level. Basically, the Enterprise and crew are spending the day going and investigating the Genosian Nebula, something that seems fairly routine, and at the beginning of the episode, it is pretty much implied that Rukiya has very little time left. Her condition is nearing a point where it's looking like she may never recover. He's stressing hard. He's failing, you know, just like the responsibilities of the father, and then also the responsibility, I imagine, as a doctor who's searching for a cure and time is running out, and he's just like low-key failing. It gets to a point where he's experimenting at the beginning of the episode, and his experiment just kind of blows up in his face, which is one of the things that makes him think later in the episode that he's actually hallucinating, because he goes up to the bridge and the entire ship, the bridge, and its crew are totally transformed into the book that Dr. BENGA reads his daughter. Now, one of the things that I have to make mention of is that I feel kind of stupid. Is the Elysian Kingdom like an actual epic tale? I did some Google searches trying to find out whether King Ridley, Sir Adya, and these characters are actually a part of a real epic that has been written by human beings, and I honestly could not find any concrete evidence to lead me to that conclusion. Am I just stupid? Have you guys heard of this epic before? That is another reason why I feel like a huge disconnect in this episode. Star Trek, in my opinion, has always done a pretty good job of connecting like Shakespearean elements and then also fantasy elements and combining that with sci-fi via use of the transporter. And then also, I'm just going to make a direct correlation with this episode and that one episode that comes out of Voyager Season 1 called Heroes and Monsters, I'm pretty sure, where the Doctor's actually forced to go inside of the holodeck, which is being commandeered by an alien presence, and they're running a simulation of Beowulf in there, and he's forced to actually go inside and do more than what his normal doctoring duties require him to do, and go in there and save Ensign Harry Kim from like holodeck death. And that is a sensational episode of Star Trek, whereas this one, really, I can make a direct comparison between the two. This one is definitely not. Like, I don't feel any connection between the Elysian Kingdom characters, and I'm going to be honest, within the first third to halfway point of the episode, a lot of the performance that the cast gives portraying these characters, like even Nurse Chapel in the little scene when they're down in the medical bay trying to come to some sense of what's happening, like none of their performances are really that entertaining. They're not really that funny. Like the dialogue isn't really that strong. I gotta be honest, not really entertained or sold by Captain Pike's performance as Sarath or Ortega's performance, or even like later down the line in the episode. It's really cool to see like Uhura is performing a character known as Queen Maeve, and she looks really amazing. Like the whole cast looks amazing, beautiful. All of their costume designs are amazing, and the strongest point of this episode, if we're gonna be honest, is how they transform the Enterprise. It looks absolutely beautiful. There's this scene where Dr. Mbenga is just kind of like walking forward as King Ridley for the first time, and there's fireflies in the background. The set design is absolutely beautiful and is the strongest point of this episode, but the dialogue is really super weak. It doesn't appeal to any Starfleet sensibilities, right? A lot of previous episodes kind of get brownie points because they rely on stuff that has already been written. Like they're taking elements from previous Star Treks in the TOS and they're really building off of that. But this episode, they're doing none of that. We're not relying on Captain Pike being the captain anymore and a lot of Starfleet elements being used. No, this is really their first attempt at, hey, we're just going to ignore all of that and really create something that is our own. We're not going to be relying on any of that cool previous Star Trek lore that's come before. We're going to try to create some original story, and it just didn't come out, in my opinion, too strong. Like normally I really enjoy the cast, a lot of personality, a lot of fun one-liners, but in this episode there was maybe like only 1 to 3 real good one-liners or real pieces of dialogue that kept me entertained. I'm going to be digging into this episode a lot weirdly. I'm sorry if you enjoyed it. I really did not enjoy it a whole lot. Princess Talia, even played by Lon, isn't a super strong or funny performance. Like I guess something that I should know is that her dog shows up, like the actress's dog shows up in the episode, and that's kind of like a cool little note, but I mean that doesn't really add to the episode or change my opinion on it at all. It's really funny when cowardly Captain Pike gets captured and manipulated by Queen Maeve. Other than that, a lot of the character interactions based on this epic are just kind of like mid. There's this one really amazing scene in the episode where Dr. Mbenga as King Ridley has to go and find his transporter daughter Rukiya. It's kind of turned into a race to go and obtain Rukiya, because we learn, you know, towards the end of this episode that everything on the ship now is an allegory towards this book, and they spend the whole episode searching for this like Mercury Stone, and the Mercury Stone is Mbenga's daughter. He like goes to the transporter and learns that she isn't there and that she's been transported somewhere on the ship, and so now all of the enemies that the Enterprise crew has now been transformed into, like Queen Maeve and her like Crimson soldiers, are now racing to go and find Mbenga's daughter. Hemmer is this wizard, and then Spock is Hemmer's wizard brother who's named Pollux. One of the really funny scenes is where Hemmer is actually threatening them with his magic. Hemmer and Mbenga are the only people on the ship who still have their consciousness intact. It's explained that Hemmer still has his consciousness intact because he is like, you know, got really strong telepathic abilities being an Enar, but then there's just Dr. Mbenga. I think he still has his consciousness intact because he's the king, he's King Ridley, and he's Rukiya's father. There's just this really funny scene where Hemmer is threatening them and threatening to use his wizard magic to make them go away, and then Spock literally goes over to Uhura, who is Queen Maeve, and says, oh, there's no such place that his magic is describing. He's totally bluffing. That was like the only real funny part of the episode, and then when Hemmer uses his magic to like send Queen Maeve and the rest of her party to Cargo Bay 12, the use of the transporter, I thought that was really hilarious. We get to a point in the episode where, yeah, we learn that the Enterprise crew and the Enterprise has been transformed into this story by an entity that is clearly in the nebula, described by Hemmer as a Boltzmann brain, a theoretical, spontaneously created consciousness, a consciousness that literally just blipped into existence like a cue that was not there one day and is like here the second. I really thought that it was going to be Mbenga's daughter that was the entity in the nebula, but really towards the end of the episode when he finally gets into his like personal quarters, we learn that she's literally just chilling there and that she's free of her terminal disease by the alien that is like responsible for all of this. After Dr. Hemmer offers assistance in speaking to the entity. He offers up his body as a vessel. The alien explains that it created this illusion because it felt the loneliness that Rukiya was feeling inside the transporter, and that when MBENGA leaves the vicinity of the nebula with Rukiya, that she will die. Rukiya is then weirdly given the choice to remain with MBENGA in the Enterprise and like probably die, or remain with the alien, basically have her consciousness and body be absorbed by the ghost nebula alien. It's like super Ghost in the Shell like. And at this point in the episode, I'm like, okay, this is really where they've decided to take this, okay? After a good third of the episode just being kind of weak and non-entertaining, they finally just decide to let MBENGA weirdly just trust a nebula alien that he's met today. Like, I get your daughter may die within the next week, but you're taking an incredible risk by just allowing this shisty alien, which previously has commandeered the entire Enterprise and stolen consciousness and free will of all of your friends, to just kind of trap them in this child's fantasy. Now you're weirdly going to trust your child's consciousness, sentience, and whatever life she has remaining to this alien that you just met today, which has just been doing shisty stuff? It makes no sense to me. It honestly just makes me think that MBENGA is totally fried, and the only reason why any of this turns out okay at the end of the episode is because it's kind of like a cool scene. Rukiya gets absorbed by the alien and then is back in an instant. Time spent with this consciousness alien in the nebula is interpreted differently by Rukiya, and she somehow ages even though she doesn't have a physical body, and comes back and explains to MBENGA that she's experienced so much and she's able to have lived a life with this alien. And it's supposed to be like kind of hard-hitting, and it's supposed to be like, oh yeah, this was like a really good, interesting plot line, but no, it's just kind of like bad through and through. I don't like MBENGA's transporter daughter. It was almost a canon mistake for her to be there in the first place. Like, it really shouldn't be that her risk of dying is from her terminal illness, but really her risk of dying should at this point be from pattern degradation. Like, you've literally been putting her in and out of the transporter and just having her suspended for like what reason? By this point, Dr. MBENGA, you should have Mr. Freezed her ass and just put her in a cryogenic stasis. This doesn't really make any sense to begin with. And then just the ending of how they chose to wrap it up, and MBENGA's weirdly going to put his trust into this like alien that, for all we know, could literally be that one alien from that other Voyager episode like Coda or something, where it eats your sentience alive and uses your neural energy as a food source. For all we know, that could have been what it was using MBENGA's daughter for, but MBENGA was just like, okay, I'm going to leave this decision to my child. You're like, you know, 6, barely sentient, and you spent like a good portion of your life inside a transporter. You definitely can make this decision about whether you want to go with this shisty alien or not. Like, bro, I really didn't like that at all. I didn't really like this episode. Like, that's really interesting how they're gonna wrap up Rukiya. It's kind of scuffed, I'm not going to lie. I've liked nothing about this plotline from the beginning to its completion. I've thought it to be completely weak. I feel like there are others out there that maybe enjoyed the Enterprise crew performance more than me, but at this point, I feel like with Rukiya's whole storyline being wrapped up at this point, like, MBENGA doesn't have to worry about her anymore, and this was his more than half of his identity as a character. I feel like there's honestly room to kick Dr. MBENGA off the show at some point and to introduce Dr. Boyce, because, like, dude, what else is there for Dr. MBENGA besides his weird transporter daughter now that she, like, taken care of by this alien, which we have no reason to just trust at all? It's so weird and strange to me, and honestly, it's just kind of weak writing, in my opinion. But yeah, this episode gets a 4 out of 10. For a majority of it, the entertainment value is subpar to me. It didn't really do a good job of blending sci-fi and fantasy Shakespearean elements like Trek has usually done in previous episodes, like Heroes and Monsters and Cupid. The episode was really more beautiful than it was entertaining, and I honestly think the Rukiya plotline has clearly been Strange New World's biggest fail to me, unfortunately. Still love Dr. MBENGA though, and Nurse Chapel was really hot in this episode, so there's something, but she literally did all besides some slightly goofy dialogue that was just not even that funny. This was the first episode in the last 3 that like fully utilized the entire cast, and with that fact being known, it definitely should have been stronger. That was my review of season 1 episode 8 of Strange New Worlds. What did you guys think about this episode? I'm pretty sure this is like the episode that I've scrutinized the most so far. This has got to be my least favorite episode of the entire season. The only one that I could even say is as bad as this one is the 3rd episode. That one was just kind of boring, and it literally had ghosts in it, which is super not sci-fi. But with all that being said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you're enjoying any of the content that you see on the channel, I'd be very flattered if you were to subscribe. Once we hit 10,000 subscribers, I am going to dress up as a Star Trek Xenos and go and probably harass people in public and film it. If you have anything that you'd like to share with me at all, leave it down in the comments below. If you leave a comment down in my comment section, be satisfied knowing that at the very minimum, I will read it to completion. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and with all that being said, hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Live long and prosper.
Can I subscribe?